presents The Nature Fix. Why Nature Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Creative. By Florence Williams. Read by Emily Wu Zeller. Introduction. The cordial air. May your trails be crooked, winding, lonesome, dangerous, leading to the most amazing view. Edward Abbey. I was hiking in Arches National Park when the Mappiness app in my phone pinged me. Some people would be annoyed, but not I. Finally, I was somewhere outside and beautiful and could tell the app how happy, relaxed, and alert I was. Very, and very. I told it so by tapping on the screen. Then I victoriously took a photo of the smooth, salmon-colored cliffs in front of me. Small topographies of lichen poked through a crack. A few perfect white clouds potted across a French blue sky. Let Big Brother, toiling away in some windowless university lab, eat that for lunch. After many months and 234 interactions with this app, I almost always got pinged when I was indoors and working, which didn't seem very helpful to either the Mappiness project or to my own. And it didn't seem fair, because I was outside fairly often, wasn't I? Mappiness is in the midst of a multi-year big data grab, asking tens of thousands of volunteers to record their moods and activities twice a day at random times. Then it matches those responses to an exact GPS location, from which it extracts information on the weather, amount of daylight, and other environmental characteristics. The aim is simple. What makes people happy? Does place matter? Or not so much? Big Brother, or Big Scientist, really, is George McCarran, a young and congenial economist at the University of Sussex. As he explained it to me, much of the happiness data out there involves relationships, activities, and economic behaviors, and much of it is familiar. People are happiest when they are well enmeshed in community and friendships, have their basic survival needs met, and keep their minds stimulated and engaged, often in the service of some sort of cause larger than themselves. But McCarran wondered about the people who already have these things going for them, or, for that matter, about the people who don't. Are there other factors that could make meaningful differences in the march of their days? To find out, he launched Mappiness in 2010, and within a year had gathered 20,000 participants and over 1 million data points. By the time I joined a few years later, he was up to 3 million. Here's what the data shows. People are least happy at work or while sick in bed, and most happy when they're with friends or lovers. Their moods often reflect the weather. Most live in the UK, so that's not surprising. But one of the biggest variables, the surprising one, is not who you're with or what you're doing. At least for this iPhone-using crowd, which tends to be young, employed, and educated. It's where you are. As one of McCarran's papers concludes, on average, study participants are significantly and substantially happier outdoors in all green or natural habitat types than they are in urban environments. And, in case you're wondering, the data didn't just reflect a vacation effect, since he factored that in. The difference in joy respondents felt in urban versus natural settings, especially coastal environments, was greater than the difference they experienced from being alone versus being with friends, and about the same as doing favorite activities like singing and sports versus not doing those things. Yet, remarkably, the respondents, like me, were rarely caught outside. 93% of the time they were either indoors or in vehicles. And even the app's definition of outside could mean standing at an intersection or collecting the mail. My own personal data was pretty pathetic. The app caught me exercising or relaxing outside only 17 times, or 7% of the pings over the course of a year. Most often I was working, followed by number 2, doing childcare, followed by commuting, doing housework, and eating. Well, at least something was fun. In the midst of a flirtation with meditating, I was caught doing that exactly twice. What Mappiness reveals, our epidemic dislocation from the outdoors, is an indictment not only of the structures and habits of modern society, but of our self-understanding. As the writer Annie Dillard once said, "How we spend our days is how we spend our lives." Why don't we do more of what makes our brains happy? Are we just too knackered by life's demands? Too far away from greenery or too tempted by indoor delights, especially the ones that plug in? Partly, but not entirely. In a revealing set of studies at Trent University in Ontario, psychologist Elizabeth Nisbet sent 150 students either outside to walk on a nearby path along a canal or underground to walk through the well-used tunnels connecting buildings on campus. Before they left, she asked them to predict how happy they thought they'd feel on their walks. Afterward, they filled out questionnaires to gauge their well-being. The students consistently overestimated how much they'd enjoy the tunnels and underestimated how good they'd feel outside. Social scientists call these bad predictions forecasting errors. Unfortunately, they play a big role in how people make decisions about how to spend their time. As Nisbet rather dejectedly concluded, people may avoid nearby nature because a chronic disconnection from nature causes them to underestimate its hedonic benefits. So we do things we crave that make us tetchy, like check our phones 1,500 times a week. No exaggeration, but I will point out that iPhone users spend 26 more minutes per day on their phone than Android users, which may be a good reason to marry an Android user, while often neglecting to do the things that bring us joy. Yes, we're busy. We've got responsibilities. But beyond that, we're experiencing a mass generational amnesia enabled by urbanization and digital creep. American and British children today spend half as much time outdoors as their parents did. Instead, they spend up to 7 hours a day on screens, not including time in school. We don't experience natural environments enough to realize how restored they can make us feel. Nor are we aware that studies also show they make us healthier, more creative, more empathetic, and more apt to engage with the world and with each other. Nature, it turns out, is good for civilization. This book explores the science behind what poets and philosophers have known for eons. Place matters. Aristotle believed walks in the open air clarified the mind. Darwin, Tesla, and Einstein walked in gardens and groves to help them think. Teddy Roosevelt, one of the most hyper-productive presidents of all time, would escape for months to the open country. On some level, they all fought a tendency to be tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people, as hiker-philosopher John Muir put it in 1901. Walt Whitman warned of the city's pestiferous little gratifications in the absence of nature. Park builder and public health advocate Frederick Law Olmsted understood. He changed the torso of my hometown, and that of many other cities as well. The Romantic movement was built upon the idea of nature as the salvation of the mortal soul and the mortal imagination, with poets penning odes to high peaks, just as industrialization was beginning to choke its way through Europe. Wordsworth wrote of a fusing of the round ocean and the living air, and the blue sky and in the mind of man. Beethoven would literally hug a linden tree in his backyard. He dedicated symphonies to landscapes and wrote, "The woods, the trees, and the rocks give man the resonance he needs." Both men were speaking of a melding of inner and outer systems. It sounds a bit wooly, but they were auguring the explorations of 21st century neuroscience, of human brain cells that sense environmental cues. Our nervous systems are built to resonate with set points derived from the natural world. Science is now bearing out what the Romantics knew to be true. Growing up in the dense, vertical habitat of a pre-war apartment building, I was drawn to the verdant, magnetic acres of New York's Central Park. Starting in middle school, I went there most days and every weekend, riding a rusty Panasonic bike, or walking, skating, or sunbathing while headed to a wetland. We are animals, and like other animals, we seek places that give us what we need. Given the opportunity, children would decamp to tree houses and build forts, wanting spaces that feel safe but with easy access to open run-around areas. We work hard to make our homes and yards a certain way, and when we can afford to, we pay considerably more for residences or hotel rooms right on the beach, or the pastoral Montreux, or a quiet tree-lined street. We all want our starter castles on the corner of prospect and refuge. Experts tell us these habitat preferences are remarkably consistent across cultures and eras. Yet until recently, psychologists and neuroscientists didn't take these affinities very seriously. Studying the impacts of the natural world on the brain is actually a scandalously new idea. Richard Lee, author of the 2008 bestseller Last Child in the Woods, told me. It should have been studied 30 to 50 years ago. So why now? Probably because we're losing our connection to nature more dramatically than ever before. Thanks to a confluence of demographics and technology, we've pivoted further away from nature than any generation before us. At the same time, we're increasingly burdened by chronic ailments made worse by time spent indoors, from myopia and vitamin D deficiency to obesity, depression, loneliness, and anxiety, among others. In parts of East Asia, which suffers perhaps the greatest epidemic of indoor-itis, rates of nearsightedness in teenagers surpass 90%. Scientists used to attribute myopia to book reading, but it instead appears to be closely linked to time spent living like naked mole rats, away from daylight. The sun primes the retina's dopamine receptors, and those in turn control the shape of the developing eye. We are learning about what this rift from the outdoors is doing to our retinal cells. But what about our minds? We have gained much since the dawn of the Internet, but many experts argue we have also grown more irritable, less sociable, more narcissistic, more distracted, and less cognitively nimble. We can't blame all our malaises on a separation from nature, but our complaints reveal some fraying of psychological resilience. There are times when we could all be a little less reactive, a little more empathetic, more focused, and more grounded. That's where a nature dose can help. And many of the researchers in this book say they can prove it. It wasn't apps or John Muir that compelled me to wonder about the relationship between nature and the human brain. For me, the exploration started when my husband accepted a job offer that would take us from an idyllic small mountain city to the hyper-urb of Washington, D.C. The summer evening we moved out of our house in Boulder, Colorado, was warm and clear. We stood on the curb watching the last of our dismayingly large pile of boxes, furniture, and gear get tossed into an Atlas Van Mines truck. The kayaks were the last to go. Bright as jelly beans, scuffed by years of river rocks, they had no clue they were destined for a concrete parking pad in a big city. Our next-door neighbors came out. Their kids draped arms around our kids. Soon, small children from our branch of dead-end streets wandered up with their scooters and dogs. At 10 and 8, our kids had been the elders, leading the pack to plastic cup boat races in the irrigation ditch, raccoon spotting, tree climbing, rock painting, and general mayhem among the shrubbery. There were days when they'd be outside from after school until dinner time, and I didn't really know exactly what they were doing. The sky was pinkish. Never does Colorado look as beautiful as when lit by a summer sunset. I'm sure I was crying before the doors on the truck slid shut. Then my neighbor started, and we were a couple of fools sniffling against the ornamental sage. There were a lot of reasons I was sorry to be leaving the West, where we'd lived for 2 decades. Chief among them were my friends and colleagues, the kids' school and pals, our woodsy house, the mountains themselves. The trails near our house were ribbons of delight, filled with surprises like the baby scorpion who skittered across to say goodbye, the changing parade of wildflowers, and my voluble hiker buddies as we dodged the clenched-faced triathletes. Even so, like a lot of people, I never really knew what I had until I lost it. What I didn't fully realize that evening the semi slid away with our worldly goods was how much the mountains had become my tonic. Nearly every day I was in them or on them or looking at them, often alone. Unlike a lot of people in Boulder, I was neither a seeker nor a fitness freak, so I didn't approach my walks with a quest for spiritual or material utility. As a born and bred New Yorker, I don't use words like tonic lightly. I've never worn a heart monitor and clocked sprints or downloaded playlists from Olympic coaches. I would just head outside, usually walking, and if I couldn't get out, I'd get surly. When my feet were moving, I would think about whatever I needed to think about, and the farther I went, the more I would space out. Sometimes I could by accident compose some writerly sentences in my head, or some insight might waft up, unbidden. I'm not a wannabe mountain sprite. There's a lot I love about cities, like great cheap tacos and smart people in fantastic eyewear. It's just that I noticed some dramatic things about my mood, creativity, imagination, and productivity in different environments, and I started to ponder it. The moving truck pointed itself toward that anti-Arcadia that is the nation's capital, and we reluctantly followed. It was 104 degrees when we arrived, and my hair shriveled up into a pile of Brillo. This surely wasn't the East Coast. This was Manaus with suits. I ventured out to explore a nearby park early in the morning, and found that to get there, I needed to sprint across a highway and bushwhack along some bridge pylons to find the words "Pussy Fudge" waiting for me in spray paint. Our house was near a river, but also near a major airport. Jets passed low overhead every 60 seconds. There was the noise, the smog, the gray, the heat. To be fair, nature as well as civilization could wreck you here. The non-native tiger mosquitoes as big as my thumbnail. The nymph ear ticks smaller than freckles. Both are capable of giving you diseases that can damage you neurologically and for life. Washington had names for weather events I'd never heard of or had to think about. Derechos, polar vortices, level 4 hurricanes, heat index advisories. I yearned for the winter. And yearning is a devastating thing, because it is defined by loss. As the months ticked by, I realized that if I was going to explore what nature offers our brains, I also had to acknowledge what its absence means. I felt disoriented, overwhelmed, lost. My mind had trouble focusing. I couldn't finish thoughts. I couldn't make decisions, and I wasn't keen to get out of bed. I was perhaps, at least in part, suffering from what journalist Louis calls nature deficit disorder. The DSM hasn't added it, but presumably they want to treat it with a pill. Louis defines it as what happens when people, particularly children, spend little or no time outside in natural environments, resulting in physical and mental problems, including anxiety and distraction. He also coined the toothsome term nature neurons to highlight the essential link between our nervous systems and the natural world they evolved in. Was the breakage of this link really happening? Is there science supporting the notion of nature deficit disorder? If so, how much nature do we need to fix ourselves? Do we need to move into a hemlock tree like in a June Craighead George novel? Or will looking out the window do? If I was going to do more than merely survive in my new urban habitat, the type now shared by most people on Earth, I was going to have to figure some things out. What was it about nature that people seemed to need? How could we get enough of it in our lives in order to be our best selves? In the course of trying to answer these questions, I came to consider the human-nature connection on a neural level. Some weeks after we rolled into town, I left on assignment for Japan to write about an obscure and somewhat embarrassing Japanese practice called forest bathing. There, I started to learn the science behind what I was experiencing at home. The Japanese researchers weren't content to lead nature to the realm of haikus. They wanted to measure its effects, document it, chart it, and deliver the evidence to policymakers and the medical community. What the Japanese didn't really know, though, was why nature seemed to be helpful in alleviating so many things that ail us. And there were a lot of other things they didn't know. Who was best helped? By what mechanisms in the brain and body? What was the right dose? And, moreover, what qualified as nature? I personally like Oscar Wilde's broad definition. A place where birds fly around uncooked. Many scientists the world over are trying to find answers. My exploration of these questions would send me down a river in Idaho with a boatload of women veterans, to South Korea, where grown firemen hold hands in the woods, to sound labs measuring stress recovery, to treadmills in 3D virtual reality rooms, and to downtown Edinburgh, Scotland, where I'd walk around with a brain-measuring EEG unit wrapped around my scalp like a postmodern crown of thorns. I'd measure black carbon and my own blood pressure, pulse rate, cortisol, and facial responses to awe. I would meet researchers convinced that the secret to nature's power lies in its geometric fractal patterns, or its particular sound vibrations, or the aerosols from trees. It was a sensory extravaganza. Scientists are quantifying nature's effects not only on mood and well-being, but also on our ability to think, to remember things, to plan, to create, to daydream, and to focus, as well as on our social skills. There were times when I was skeptical, and times when I believed. I spent time with people who were trying to get well, people who were trying to get smart, people finding the best ways to educate young children, who are, by nature, exploratory, kinetic, and full of wonder, all qualities enhanced by time outside. And people who were merely trying, like me, to stay sane in a frenetic world. Because of the 2 years I spent researching this book, I would emerge feeling better myself, and much more aware of the surprising science behind why I was feeling that way. And while well-being may sound like vague psycho-speak, its impact is real. Enhancing it has been shown to add years to your lifespan. I've divided the book into 5 parts to help make sense of the material, and to make it useful. The first part sets up the 2 dominant theories that attempt to explain why our brains need nature, and that drive much of the research. The first chapter takes us to Japan, where researchers are quantifying nature's role in lowering stress and boosting mental health, using a framework based on the biophilia hypothesis, the idea that we feel most at home in nature because we evolved there. The second chapter swerves over to Utah, where American neuroscientists are more interested in how nature helps restore our attention-addled brains to a state of sharper cognition. I've organized the rest of the book by nature dose. I explore the immediate effects of quick bursts, or nearby nature, on our 3 main senses: smell, sound, sight. Then I look at what happens to our brains and bodies when we hang outside a bit longer to approximate the finished recommended nature dose: 5 hours a month. In part 4, I take a deeper, longer dive into the wilderness, where really interesting things happen to our brains. This is where, in the words of neuroscientist David Strayer at the University of Utah, something profound is going on. Finally, we'll look at what it all means to the way most of us live, in cities. Throughout, there will be insights into how we can better construct our days, lives, and communities so that everyone gains. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you to pitch your smartphone over a waterfall. The world we live in is fully plugged in. But it's important to call out just how radically our lives have shifted indoors, and what those changes mean for our nervous systems, so that we may hope to ease and manage the transition. My move to the city is a micro-narrative of the demographic and geographical shifts occurring on a global scale. Homo sapiens officially became an urban species sometime in 2008. That's when the World Health Organization reported that for the first time, more people throughout the world live in urban areas than rural ones. Last year in the United States, cities grew at a faster clip than suburban regions for the first time in 100 years. Looked at another way, we are in the middle of the largest mass migration in modern times. Yet, as humans shift their activities to cities, astoundingly little planning, resources, and infrastructure go into making those spaces meet our psychological needs. In Istanbul in the spring of 2013, 8 people died and thousands were injured in protests stemming from the proposed paving over of one of the last parks in the city, Taksim Gezi. Over 2 million of the region's trees had already been cut down to make way for a new airport and a new bridge over the Bosphorus Strait. The park was slated for a new shopping mall and luxury apartments. As bulldozers entered the park to mow down the urban forest, citizens blocked their way. They were willing to die for the last tree. "We will not leave until they declare the park is ours," said one 24-year-old. As of this writing, the trees still stand, but their fate remains uncertain. Taksim Gezi became a symbol not only of the importance of nature to city life, but to democracy itself, just as Frederick Law Olmsted knew all along. A sense of enlarged freedom is to all, at all times, the most certain and the most valuable gratification afforded by a park, he wrote. Yet we think of nature as a luxury, not a necessity. We don't recognize how much it elevates us, both personally and politically. That, ultimately, is the aspiration of this book. To find the best science behind our nature-primed neurons and to share it. Without this knowledge, we may not ever fully honor our deep cranial connection to natural landscapes. Not far from where I sent my lichen rock photo into the mappiness ether, 2 mighty rivers merge, the Green and the Colorado. It makes me happy to think of this geography because of a story of 2 goofy brothers I know, who, in college, built a raft out of inner tubes and pallets, twisted out of their clothes, and pushed off the bank of the Green, heading to the confluence. They had baggies of gorp, a couple of jars of peanut butter, some water jugs. The water was calm on this stretch, and they were living the life. Just a couple of hours into the 3-week trip, they got pulled over by a ranger. Fortunately, this was before the days of a required permit, fire pan, and chemical toilet. But the naked boys were short one life jacket. They were so busted. The ranger hauled them off to a county judge, who fined them, made them buy a life jacket, and sent them back down the river. Always better than being sent up the river. Those 2 guys are my brothers-in-law. This story has entered our sizable family canon of misadventures by uncles. But it seems ages ago that such a story would even be possible. 2 college boys alone in the wilderness, having the time of their lives, able to make it weeks without civilization, minus a trip to a judge. Yet these 2 barely have gray hair. It was only a generation ago. The dramatic loss of nature-based exploration in our children's lives and in our own has happened so fast we've hardly noticed it, much less remarked on it. We evolved in nature. It's strange we'd be so disconnected, said Nisbet. Most of us don't know we're missing anything. We may have a pet and occasionally go to the beach, so what's the big deal? Well, what is the big deal? That's what I wanted to find out. And if something serious is missing, how do we recapture it? As a journalist who writes frequently about the environment, I often end up writing about the way environment hurts our health. From flame retardants getting into human tissue to air pollution's effects on the developing brain. It was both a pleasure and a revelation to consider how, instead, our surroundings can also help prevent physical and mental problems and align us with the World Health Organization's definition of health. A complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. The former health minister of Scotland calls this health-making salutagenesis, inspired by the mid-20th century sociologist Aaron Antonovsky, who asked, if the world is so crazy, what makes us able to keep sallying forth? My city hair flattened to my scalp with gelatinous product, gulping vitamin D. I decided the answers are worth pursuing. Part 1. Looking for nature neurons. 1. The biophilia effect. In short, the brain evolved in a biocentric world. Edward O. Wilson. There is nothing you can see that is not a flower. There is nothing you can think that is not the moon. Basho. When I pictured Shingen-yoku, forest bathing, I conjured Sleeping Beauty in her corpse phase, surrounded by primordial trees, twittering birds, and shafts of sunlight. You just knew she was somehow taking it all in, and she'd awake refreshed, enlightened, and ready for her hot prince. But this was wrong on so many levels. First off, Japan doesn't have a lot of primeval forest left. And second, you have to work at this, although corpse-like moments are not discouraged. In Chichibu-Tamakai National Park, a 90-minute train ride from Tokyo, I was supposed to be concentrating on the cicadas and the sound of a flowing creek when a loud Mitsubishi van rumbled by. It was disgorging more campers to a nearby tent village where kids were running around with their fishing poles and pink bed pillows. This was nature, Japan style. The dozen others with me on our Shinrin-yoku hike didn't seem to mind the distractions. The Japanese go crazy for this practice, which is standard preventative medicine here. It involves cultivating your senses to open them to the woods. It's not about wilderness. It's about the nature-civilization hybrid the Japanese have cultivated for thousands of years. You can stroll a little, write a haiku, crack open a spicebush twig and inhale its woodsy, sassy scent. The whole notion is predicated on an ancient bond that can be unearthed with a few sensory tricks. People come out from the city and literally shower in the greenery, our guide, Kunio, explained to me. This way, they are able to become relaxed. To help us along, Kunio, a volunteer ranger, had us standing still on a hillside, facing the creek, with our arms at our sides. I glanced around. We looked like earthlings transfixed by the light of the mothership. Weathered and jolly, Kunio told us to breathe in for a count of 7 seconds, hold for 5, release. Concentrate on your belly, he said. We needed this. Most of us were urban desk jockeys. We looked like weak-shelled soybeans, tired and pale. Standing next to me was Ito Tatsuya, a 41-year-old Tokyo businessman. Like many day hikers in this country, he carried an inordinate amount of gear, much of it dangling from his belt. A cell phone, a camera, a water bottle, and a set of keys. The Japanese would make great Boy Scouts, which is probably why they make such great office workers, working longer hours than anyone else in the developed world. It's gotten to the point where they've coined a term, karashi, death from overwork. The phenomenon was identified during the 1980s bubble economy when workers in their prime started dropping dead. And the concept reverberated into the future and throughout the developed world. Civilization can kill us. Ito and I breathed in the pines, and then dove into our bento boxes full of octopus and pickled root vegetables. Kunio was moving around, showing people the astonishingly twiggy walking stick insect. Ito's shoulders seemed to be unclenching by the minute. When I'm out here, I don't think about things, he said, deftly scooping up shards of radish while I splattered mine onto the leaf litter. What's the Japanese word for stress? I asked. Stress, he said. With the largest concentration of giant trees